So good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for being here. What Christy did not mention is that we are married, and and I cannot recall a time where she ever referred to me as doctor. So I feel really honored. But please, my name is Chippla. I don't really believe in titles. So when she put this presentation, when she put this event in place a while back, and she had no audience, I told her just cancel and do it 6 months into the future. But she kept pushing and saying, I have to do this. I have to do this. On me, what I saw was pressure to put slides together. And about a week and a half ago, I asked her, are you sure this is still holding? She said, yes. I said, oh, but my slides are only 60% done. She said, no, it's going to hold. And I think it's really been an interesting adventure for me putting these slides together. I work in the energy industry. I work for Shell. But she asked me to talk about global energy. And I asked myself, what is global energy? It's such a broad topic. And one question I asked her was, who are the people who would be attending, either in person or online? What's their background? How educated are they, with all due respect? How much do they know? It's very difficult to talk about energy because it's such a broad topic and the audience is broad. So I will do my best today to keep it very, very simple, also acknowledging the fact that I'm speaking in a foreign language to most of our Dutch audience here. So I'll do my best to keep it simple. As I start, I will ask all of you to do one thing, please, and that is to forget about your perceptions about where you live, forget about where you come from, forget about the village or the city or the town you are, and think of humanity as one globe for the purpose of this presentation. After I'm done, please feel free to think the way you want to. But for now, just think of humanity as one globe, okay? Let me see if this works. We move to, yes. And so what we see here is our common home, as Christy, my wife, likes to refer to it. So imagine that you were a creature, a space creature looking down on our planet. And you see a number of civilizations, functioning on this planet. They've developed, some of them have developed very advanced technologies, advanced infrastructure. But for all of these things to happen, we need energy. There is no civilization without energy. Energy is the bedrock of everything we enjoy today, especially in this part of the world, which by human standards, we consider to be quite advanced, okay? Imagine you were this creature from space asking, what sources of energy does this humanity use to power its civilizations? This is what I think you would see. So you would have, it's showing, right? Yes, it is. So these are the energy sources you would see. Renewables, yeah, which could be solar, wind. You would have biomass, you would have gas, you would have oil, you would have nuclear, you would have hydro from water, and you would have coal. We can break this down into different percentages, okay? Now the percentages below are not correct. And I have a question for each of you, either online or in person here. How would you allocate these percentages? I don't need answers, but just take a few seconds to ask yourself, what percentage is the contribution of renewables to the total energy system? And by total energy, I mean everything that needs energy in the world. It doesn't matter whether it's electricity or whether it's energy to heat your home or energy to boil your hot water, to make your coffee, every form of energy you need. How much of it is renewables? How much of it is from hydro? How much is from coal? Just take a few seconds and think. No answers, just think about it. Because I spent time
meer en dat veel minder.
Ja.
Trying to find the answers.
Die is ook vrij hoog. De kolen ook heel hoog.
Ja.
Yeah, that's part of the fun, huh? Can I go on? Okay, let's go on. Okay, so I spent some time trying to answer these questions as well, and this is what I came up with. Okay, let's move the world away and let's ask these percentages to go where they should be. Okay, oil is about 1/3 of all the energy we consume in the world today. Hydro is 3%. Gas is almost 1/4 of what we consume today. And this country, the Netherlands, is known to be a huge gas producer. Well, it still is and used to be, even though production is going down. Solar and wind, or renewables as we call them, are just 2% roughly of the total energy we consume in the world today. Coal, which our green friends don't like, is a quarter of our total energy consumption. Civilization today could not function without coal. That's a fact today. And we have biomass at about 10% and nuclear, which is also a controversial source of energy, at 5% here. So these numbers are debatable. You know, what is renewables? What is biomass? Yeah, we can move plus or minus 1% here and there, but it gives us a good picture as to what our energy system looks like. I'm sure just by looking at this, you can already start saying the hydrocarbons, which are oil, gas, and coal, dominate. That's a fact, irrespective of what we think. It's just what it is in today's world. This is what we see, okay? Okay, let's move on. I would like to talk about primary energy. Now, primary energy essentially refers to the raw form of energy that we use to power our world. Electricity is not primary energy. To produce electricity, we need to either burn oil, gas, coal, or we need to put solar panels, or we need to build nuclear power plants. So electricity is not primary energy. Primary energy is the raw source of energy. What I just showed in the previous slides is primary energy. I will show that data again in a different form from a different source. This chart you see here comes from BP, here the oil company. They have a fantastic, what they call statistical review of world energy, which they publish every year. And their data is a little bit different from what I showed in the previous slide, but the story does not change. Oil, gas, and coal dominates. It's still pretty clear here. The world uses a total of 550 exajoules of primary energy. That is how much is consumed or was consumed in 2020, which has not changed much. The problem we see here is that hydrocarbons dominate, but to use hydrocarbons, we need to combust them. We need to burn them. And when we do that, we release carbon dioxide, or CO2 as we call it. And most scientists, not all, but most scientists believe that CO2 is a greenhouse gas that causes climate change. We'll come back to this later. Now, the use of energy is not evenly distributed across the world. As I've mentioned, for those of us present in person here, we all live in a relatively rich country with very advanced infrastructure, very good quality of life. Not everybody in the world is privileged to enjoy the quality of life we enjoy here. And one reason is that they do not have the same access to energy as we do in this country. So if we take a look at who is consuming energy in the world, we see primary energy consumption by continent. We see that Asia dominates, but that's not surprising because Asia houses 52% of the global population. If we break this down into energy consumption per person, we see that North America, primarily the United States, is the largest energy consumer per person in the world. Europe is somewhere in the middle. And I think we need to give credit to Europe because Europe has had energy improvement, energy efficiency programs in place for quite a while, such that even though society here is relatively advanced, energy consumption is nothing on par with what we see in North America. Africa, of course, consumes the least. So for every 1 unit of energy, somebody on the African continent consumes, the average European consumes about 7 units. The average North American consumes 22 units or 21 units. And the average person living in Asia Pacific, which includes Australia, consumes about 4 to 5 units. So energy consumption is not the same everywhere in the world. So when we talk about climate change, yes, climate change is an issue, but so is energy access, so is energy poverty. The lack of access to energy is an issue for certain people in certain parts of the world, which makes the whole debate around climate very, very complex. Are we going to prevent development because of the climate, or are we going to continue with development while we ruin our planet? And that is a huge dilemma, which we will revisit later in the presentation. If we look at the use of energy over time, I'll just rush through the slides. You can see energy use goes up over time. Oh, the mouse does not show, so okay. One part of the world that has really been consuming energy for the last, say, it doesn't work. For the last, say, 20 to 30 years, it's Asia. And we see the rise of China, the rise of India, the economies are burgeoning and growing. The energy consumption is just way, way out. And you can actually see it's increasing really quite steeply. In North America and Europe, primary energy consumption has peaked. So energy consumption in North America and Europe has peaked and will only fall. The reason why you see this tiny cliff at the end of each of these plots here is because of COVID. So in 2020, energy consumption went down because economies were closed and there was less industrial activity, less people were on the roads driving cars. That's why energy fell a bit. But primary energy consumption in North America and Europe has peaked. It will only go down. Also, you have energy efficiency programs. Speaking with one of the attendees here, and he mentioned he's working on energy efficiency, which is good because you're responsible for keeping the standard of living without increasing energy consumption. And you can see here it's been flat in Europe, actually going down. In places like the Middle East and Africa, it's increasing from a very low base in Africa in particular. But Asia is the tiger in the room, if I can call it that. It's still consuming energy astronomically. And India is yet to actually start developing. So when India really picks up to the level of development we see in China, it's really scary to think of what the future would look like. I really cannot think of it. Okay, and I've already mentioned this. Hydrocarbons dominate the energy system. No discussion, no debate. That's a fact. It's not subjective. Here you can see the various continents. Oh, it doesn't show actually. Okay, so maybe I should help. Oh, what a pity. Can I get rid of this? It seems I can't get rid of it, can I? Well, no, let's leave it. I'll explain. So the first bar you see here is North America. And you can see the second. Yeah, but people won't see me online. That's the problem. Yeah, okay, the first bar you see here is North America. The last bar you see here is Asia Pacific. After North America, we have Central America and South America, then Europe. This is Europe. And then we have Russia and its and other CIS states like Kazakhstan and co. And then we have the Middle East and Africa. The green you see here is oil. The red is natural gas. The gray is coal. So you can see oil, natural gas, and coal are dominant. In North America, they account for 80% of all energy consumption. In Europe, they account for about 70% of all, am I right? Yes, about 70% of all energy consumption. We can see that the continent that has the highest amount of hydropower or clean energy is South America. And that has to do with Brazil. It has a lot of renewable hydroelectricity potential. And in the Middle East, which is this over here, almost every piece of energy consumed comes from oil and gas, almost everything. So you can see that consumption differs across the world here. Europe is somewhere in the middle, trying to push a transition. The Middle East is one extreme, still fully reliant on oil and gas. North America, well, it's about 80%, but without a doubt, hydrocarbons dominate our system. And that brings us to what I call the first perspective. There will be three perspectives in this presentation. The first perspective is what you can see on the presentation. And it is a fact, it's subject to debate. It's something we need to change if we want to address climate change, but it would come at a cost, and we will address that cost at the tail end of this presentation. Okay, so this is the first perspective. And that takes us to the whole dilemma we face today with hydrocarbons. This is a seesaw, as you can see. We get a lot of benefits from hydrocarbons. They do more than just give us energy to power our modern lives. I just put a few examples here of how hydrocarbons affect us. You know, when you clean your homes, you use the cleaning liquids. It's made from hydrocarbons, everything about it. When you've got kids, you buy them toys. Most of these toys are made from chemicals that come from oil. We like to go on holidays. Either we drive or we enter airplanes. Most of us do that. Well, I know I'm guilty of that. Even the clothes we're wearing, you might be so shocked to know, but 50% of all fabrics in the world is from polyester. Polyester comes from oil. It's made from oil. 50% is from polyester. An additional 5% is from nylon. So more than half of all the fabrics we use for clothes in the world comes from oil. It's not from cotton, no, it comes from oil. And I put a COVID test kit. Many of us have taken the COVID tests. The test kit is plastic. It's from oil. That's it. It's plastic. So, you know, if we have to get rid of oil, what happens to the good life? What happens? What are we going to use to replace it? I don't have the answers. Maybe you do. But oil, coal, and gas dominate our lives so much that replacing them will take time. I think it needs to happen, but it would mean restructuring so much of our society. Everybody here has got a phone, a mobile phone. I do well. I'm using it as a timer now. I've got a phone, but plastic casing, lots of the components inside in the circuits in it from oil and gas as well. Yeah. Okay. And the good life usually comes with consequences. We've mentioned that when we combust hydrocarbons, we emit CO2. CO2 is a greenhouse gas. It results in climate change, hotter temperatures. We see forest fires, hotter temperatures. We see more evaporation of water into the atmosphere, which results in floods, as we unfortunately saw in Europe during the summer. We also saw in India, we saw in China, we saw in parts of Africa. There's plastic waste. You know, there's so much plastic in the sea today that it's become such an issue, and that's a consequence of our good lives. We've got a good life, but it comes at a certain cost. And that's something we need to be aware of. It's nice to speak about climate change. It's nice to talk about the need for sustainability. But if each of us is not taking action, then it's all just talk. And in my view, just hot air. That's what it is. Because I like the good life, to be honest. I want to live a good life. I want to live in a decent society. I want to live in a modern society. But it comes at a cost. Am I willing to give up what I enjoy today because of the consequences? My honest answer is, I don't know. I'm not sure. I really don't know. And that's why we're here today, to dialogue and debate. So let's look a bit on climate change, okay? Chris started talking about climate change and all that. And yeah, okay, what is climate change, if you ask? Not all scientists agree that greenhouse gases cause climate change. Not all, most do. She's mentioned the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. They put out a report every year, which is so complicated that probably most people get bored reading it. I managed to spend about 1 hour reading the last one that was released about a month ago. And I think the summary is that we're past the tipping point and we're headed for disaster. Fair enough, okay. What is climate change, if you ask in a nutshell? Yeah, okay, this I got from Wikipedia. Yeah, to be honest, it says it's global warming, which results from human activities, which further causes shifts in weather patterns. So we're transforming the Earth more than at any time in the history when modern human beings have been on this planet. And depending on whether you accept the scientific explanation or not, modern human beings have been on this planet for about 200,000 years. So modern human beings, as in Homo sapiens, as we know them, or as we see ourselves today, our ancestors have been on the Earth for 200,000 years. And we can see that as the beginning of the modern human style, okay? What are the main sources of greenhouse gases? This comes out well, yes, okay. Carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is responsible for about 1/4 of all greenhouse gases, according to the United States Environmental Protection Agency. But we also have methane. Methane is responsible for another 15–16%. And the sources of methane are largely industrial activity and agriculture. Agriculture is a significant methane contributor. And I don't know if Sibe is going to give a presentation later. I don't know if you're going to talk about this in a bit more, methane emissions or something.
Where methane is coming from.
Yes. Will you talk about that later?
Yes.
Okay, so we have a speaker who is more knowledgeable than I am, so I'll move on and leave this to him. Okay, and here you see a breakdown of greenhouse gas emissions based on the source in terms of the industry. You know, 1/4 of it comes from electricity. So each time you flip your switch on at home to have some light, you're emitting greenhouse gases. Agriculture is also responsible for 1/4. Largely, we have methane, we have nitrogen oxides from the fertilizers as well. So methane largely comes from cattle. So when you have intensive breeding of cattle, like we do in this country, there's a lot of methane emissions. There's also a lot of intensive farming in this country. I think this country is, I think, either the 2nd or 3rd largest agricultural exporter in the world, which is remarkable for a country this size to be so innovative, to be able to be the 2nd or 3rd largest exporter of agricultural products. But it comes at a price, and that is greenhouse gases. Okay, let's move on. What we see here is the increase in the amount of CO2 over time. It starts in 1750 and it ends 2019, so 2 years ago. It's actually an exponential increase. We've moved from almost zero, well, zero, a very low base, to about 35 billion tons of CO2 being emitted every year into the atmosphere. Please keep this number, but we'll need it later. 35 billion tons, 35 billion tons. Another number you need to keep is 415 parts per million. Please, if you have to leave here with anything, know this number, 415, 415, 415 for our Dutch audience. The reason this really strikes me is because 10 years ago, I was working in the office and working on carbon abatement. And I read a report from the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, where they said, oh, we had just reached 400 parts per million. And it was such a big deal. This was before the Paris Climate Change Agreement. We're going to talk about Paris. And I was like, oh, we've just hit 400. But now we've gone 10 years later, we're on 415. So where are we going to be in 10 years' time? Probably 430 or 440. And this number comes from NASA, the United States Space Administration. So they are the ones providing this number. And you can see it starts from about, I'm really struggling to see this. It starts from about 800,000 years ago. So before there were modern people in this world, actually even before you had humans, even the early humans. So from 800,000 years ago until the Industrial Revolution, from here to here, the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere kept fluctuating with time, but it stayed within a narrow band. It never shot up. But after the Industrial Revolution, which started in the 19th century, somewhere here, the CO2 amount just shot up significantly. And you can see in this the next slide here, which shows the consequence of that. It shows global temperature rising, and it starts from 1800. And it goes all the way to 2019. So from 1800 until, I would say, 1980, temperatures increased a bit, but between 1950 and 1980, it was kind of like stable. But since 1980, it's just gone up significantly and temperatures continue to increase. Today, we are about 1 degree Celsius above the 1950 to 1980 baseline. The world on average is about 1 degree warmer than it was between 1950 and 1980. And we can see that here in a pictogram I got from our world in data. The red shows parts of the world that are warming. The poles are warming, meaning there will be ice caps melting. We have parts of Europe, especially Central Europe, around Germany, Poland, Austria, warming. And a consequence of this warming, we saw, unfortunately, with the floods we had. Parts of Africa, the Kalahari Desert, parts of Australia, warming very, very, very much. Not all parts are warming. Some places are cooling, as you can see. But on average, if you take a mean temperature, a mean average, the world is warming as a result of CO2 emissions, which cause climate change. I think this is a highly probable explanation. Not everybody agrees with this. If you go to the US, you would meet some, I don't know how to describe people without insulting them. You would meet some people who challenge this and say it's not true. I'm sure even in this country, in everywhere, you have people who say this is just nonsense. They don't believe it. But most scientists do. I'm an engineer and I'm trained in rational thinking. And I think you can make the link between greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. Okay, so let's move on. Yes, so can government save us from climate change? That's the next question. In 2015, let me just make this a full slide. Okay. In 2015, there was a United Nations conference on climate change, the so-called COP21, so Conference of the Parties, as a part of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It was attended by almost practically every country in the world, 196 of them. And each country went into the Paris Climate Change Agreement with what they call an INDC, an intended nationally determined contribution. In other words, this is what we are going to do as a country to reduce the amount of CO2 we emit. And every country agreed to it, I think, at the end of the day. I think at the last day of the conference, it was only, I think, Costa Rica that decided not to sign. It's a small country. They pushed them a bit, and I think they agreed to sign. And today, almost every country has ratified Paris, except a few, as you can see here, the light green countries: Libya, Turkey, Iraq, Iran, Angola, South Sudan. I think that's about it. Every other country seems to have ratified it, including North Korea, which is quite surprising. But under the presidency of Trump, the United States pulled out. This is not a political discussion, so I will stay out of US politics. But, sorry? I should stay out of US politics, right? It seems like a good thing to do. So under the presidency of Trump, the United States pulled out from Paris, but Joe Biden, elected last year, decided to come back in, which seems like a good thing. The goal of the Paris Climate Change Agreement is to keep global temperature rise below 2 degrees, it's always difficult to explain this. Let me explain it the other way around. To prevent global temperatures from rising more than 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. That is it. So let's not allow temperatures to rise more than 2 degrees above what we had before society started industrializing. So in the 19th century, 18th century. But Paris would also like to keep that rise, if possible, less than 1.5 degrees. The problem with all these UN conventions is, you know, with all due respect, does anybody here work for the UN or anybody online? Does anybody work for the UN? Ah, okay, oh, I have to be careful.
I used to work.
You used to, okay, now I can say what I want. Any other person here? Anybody works for the UN? Online, anybody? I'm gonna speak my mind, okay. It's recorded, you're recording, right? The problem with all these UN conventions, there is a lot of talk, but there is no way to enforce these things. So, you know, countries are saying, you know, this is what we're going to do, but who is enforcing it? There is nobody enforcing it. So I know they're meant to meet in Glasgow later this year, you know, to continue the whole, but it's like, it's good, but I don't think this will save us. You know, it's all talk. And maybe some of you have been involved in politics. You know what politics is like. It's almost like a game governments go to play. At the end of the day, governments are concerned about the well-being of the people they govern, and they will do what they have to do to keep the people they govern or people who vote them happy. And if it means burning more coal, they will do it. That's the reality. And we'll come back to that later. Okay. So if governments cannot save us, who do we turn to? Let's turn to a combination of governments and the markets. And by markets, I mean mechanisms that governments allow to operate such that the development of clean energy is incentivized. Please don't look at this. Don't try to understand this plot. It's from the World Bank. I'll explain what I can, but just ignore. What the colors tell you is some countries have mechanisms in place to reduce CO2 emissions. That's all the colors here tell us. In Europe, we have the ETS, the emissions trading scheme, which is overseen by the EU. What it does essentially is it allocates carbon credits to different countries. Each country then takes those credits and looks at its main polluters and says, okay, you company A, you can only emit up to a certain extent. If you want to emit more, you have to buy additional credits. If you emit less than the government actually allocates to you, you can sell the credit. So the ETS in Europe is the world's most advanced carbon scheme. It's really the most advanced. And I think Europe at this point is the only part of the world that has an emissions trading scheme. It's not perfect, don't get me wrong. If you read the news, you see there's a bit of corruption sometimes in terms of who gets allocated what and all that. But I mean, we're human beings, nothing is ever perfect. I think it's a very good start. You also have some countries that have carbon taxes. In this country, we effectively have a carbon tax. When you go put petrol, the benzene in your car, the government takes about 70% of everything you pay there goes to the government. It is a kind of tax, whatever it's called. But other countries also have carbon taxes. You have Singapore with a carbon tax. China is proposing to have a carbon tax as well. I think South Africa is also thinking about a carbon tax. Some countries have taxes on coal. India has a tax on coal. The goal of all these taxes is to make hydrocarbons very expensive and unattractive to incentivize people to invest in clean energy. The same thing with the ETS in Europe. It's meant to do the same thing. You have low carbon fuel standards in the US, California, yeah, and that's also to incentivize clean energy. You have renewable energy tariffs in places like Germany, Japan. That means if you generate energy from renewable sources like solar, wind, or hydro, the government is willing to say you're paid a fixed amount, irrespective of what it costs to generate. You're paid a fixed amount, which is very, very attractive. Much more attractive than if you generate it from coal or oil. So it incentivizes people to do more clean energy projects. And this has been relatively successful in Germany. And finally, you have clean energy subsidies, where governments give money. I think that works a lot here in the Netherlands, where the government incentivizes by giving subsidies for people to invest in wind projects or in solar projects or in bio projects. So these are the kind of mechanisms that governments use together with the markets to work together to incentivize clean energy. So let's take a look at this. Anybody knows what this is, either online or in person? The name is there, but does this resonate with anybody? You're not allowed. You've seen my slides. You're not allowed to talk. Sure. Okay. This is the EU carbon price, or CO2 price. This is the EU CO2 price. Currently, carbon dioxide costs today about 65 euro per ton in Europe. This is the European ETS, the emissions trading scheme I talked about, where carbon permits are traded. So today you pay if you emit, if the government gives you a certain cap on how much you can emit, and you emit more than that, you have to buy additional credits, and you would pay on the market 65 euro per ton of additional carbon dioxide that you emit, which is quite expensive, I would say. But the thing here is, maybe I'll just bring the text as well, even though it's not so much for reading. The thing here is the price of CO2 in Europe has increased significantly in the past year. And, I start to ask myself, is this really driven by the markets alone? It's gone from like $20 a ton in 2006. It's currently about 65 actually today. It's gone up since I put these slides together. And during the financial crisis in 2007, 2008, it went practically to zero. Nobody was interested in carbon permits, because that becomes a secondary issue when the banks are all in crisis here. And I personally think this is a good scheme, but today we hear a lot about speculators playing in this space. When you have investment banks, American investment banks seeing European carbon market as the next market that they can go into to speculate and create derivative products and create all kinds of securities. The way the investment banks work, and I know this is not an economic talk, but they can do what they call securitize. They trade everything. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as somebody's willing to buy. They can securitize that product by creating a derivative on it, and sometimes they create derivatives on derivatives. And for those of us who are not involved in this world, it all sounds very strange, but that is the reality. There are a lot of speculators in the EU carbon market, and as I will show on the next slide, yeah, you have very influential people in the EU complaining about this. There's a lot of speculation, and something needs to be done. If you let the markets work alone, speculators come in. It's almost the same as we see with the housing market in the Netherlands. It's become very speculative. And if you let the governments take full control, nothing works. So we need to find the right balance. To what extent do we allow the governments to play, and to what extent do we allow the markets to play? And that's a difficult line to thread. But I think we can all agree that the European ETS is the most advanced carbon market in the world. It seems to be working. It's a model for other countries. China is thinking of adopting something very similar as well, okay? And this takes us to our second perspective, second out of 3 perspectives in today's presentation. I think greenhouse gases cause climate change. I think so. And as I've explained, governments have put in place mechanisms to deal with greenhouse gases, and also to decarbonize the energy systems and to incentivize clean energy. Okay, so let's move to the last part of the presentation. We've looked at whether governments can save us, whether the markets can save us. Now let's ask if renewable energy can save us. Let's start with solar, okay, which is renewable energy technology I know a little bit about, and I like. Yeah, so I'm biased here. What we see here is the increase in installed solar power capacity globally from, say, 2006 to 2019. What you see here is a kind of exponential growth. It's been growing significantly. Today, we have 650 gigawatts of installed solar energy capacity globally. Of course, it's not distributed evenly, but globally across the whole world, okay? Here you can see where the bulk of this is. It's largely in the Asia Pacific, in Europe, and parts of North America. They dominate, especially in Asia here. Even though solar has grown and is growing significantly, it still only accounts for 3% of electricity production and 0.6% of total energy production globally. So it's nothing. It's nothing. It's just starting. It's still, you know, you drive in Germany and Belgium, you see all these nice solar farms, and but they still have a long way to go if we're going to use clean energy to replace the traditional system. 0.6% of the total energy production in the world is from solar, despite this impressive growth from almost nothing to 650 gigawatts. Okay. Yeah, and you can also ask yourself, this very rapid increase in solar, is this sustainable? Is it a bubble? Or do you think solar energy will disrupt the global energy system? I have my views. I think it could disrupt, but it's starting from a very, very, very low base. So when our eco friends, our green friends talk about clean energy, you know, sometimes it's helpful to contextualize the discussion. We're not going to get rid of hydrocarbons tomorrow by putting solar panels. It will take a much longer time. It will take a while, but we have to do it. Okay. The beauty of solar is that the cost keeps coming down. I'm looking at time. I need to be a bit fast. Okay. The cost keeps coming down. So every time you double the amount of solar panels that you install globally, the price comes down by 20%. Double that again, the price comes down by 20%. Double that again, the price. So the price keeps coming down. That solar today is very, very cheap. It's affordable everywhere in the world. It is really cheap. For those of you who are a bit technical, I put something here called Swanson's law. Some of you might be familiar with Moore's law for silicon chips. Maybe not. So Swanson's law essentially says when you double the amount of solar PV you install, the price. Sorry, when you double the amount of solar PV you install, the price comes down by 20%. That's it. So solar is getting very cheap, which is a good thing. Okay. But there's a paradox to solar. And this paradox is what we see here is global solar installation. In other words, which part of the world have a lot of sunshine? The more red, lots of sunshine. The more green, not enough sunshine. If we try to relate this to the parts of the world that have the most installed solar, you see Germany has the highest amount of solar installed per capita. But Germany is such a green country. You know, they have nice summers, especially in Bavaria in the south. You get, but during winter and during autumn, you barely see the sun. And even when you see, the sun is really at a very low angle that it never really goes up. It's at a very low angle. So yeah, so I call this a paradox. You know, solar countries doing solar, the wealthier countries are, for lack of a better word, placing solar in the wrong places. It's just not in the right place because we're not using these panels efficiently. You know, in the US, it's okay. In Australia, it's okay. But in Europe, yeah, you can do solar, but I think not on a large scale. It's not, maybe Spain, Italy, Greece, south of France. Yes, they are the ideal locations. But yeah, this is a paradox that for me just really stands out. Okay. And the last thing I'd like to talk about solar is it sustainable? There's been a lot of debate about solar panels. You have some people saying, oh, you know, it's a waste of energy. It costs more energy to make solar panels than you'll ever get out of them. So is solar energy sustainable? What do you think? And my answer is, it depends on whom you ask. And really, it depends on whom you ask, because people can be so biased about this topic. Look at this. Researchers from Switzerland looking at solar installations, and they claim that the energy returned over the energy invested, EROEI, energy returned over energy invested for solar panels in Switzerland is 0.8, which means you actually invest more energy to make the panels and to install them than you ever get from the electricity produced. That's what these guys claim, okay? But then you had another group that looked at the same Switzerland and said, the energy returned over the energy invested is 7. And who do you believe? I mean, who do you think is right? Looking at the same country with solar installations, two groups of researchers came with different conclusions. I know who I believe because I read both papers for this presentation. I believe the guys in green because the arguments were more articulate. The guys in red were using outdated, but it shows you how subjective these discussions are. So we need to be very critical. We need to question everything. Don't let what politicians say or what people on the street say sway our views here. We need to be quite critical. I'm told I have just 5 more minutes. I'm almost done. Okay. So finally on wind energy, can wind energy save us? This is total global wind installations. Again, like solar, wind also has about 650 gigawatts of total installed capacity, and it's growing very fast. But again, wind is only 1.2% of global energy. Solar was 0.6%, wind is 1.2%. So starting at a very low base. Okay. And wind does not face the paradox we see with solar. No, most wind installations you find in wealthier countries, we generally tend to be the more windy countries, you know, in the North Sea, the Barents Sea, Norway, the UK, in coastal US, you have quite some wind installation. Also in South America, in Argentina. So wind turbines seem to be placed in the right locations, unlike solar panels. So the paradox we spoke of for solar does not exist here. And this leads me to my last, to my last perspective. And that is that solar and wind generate a tiny fraction of our total energy, less than 2%, actually, just about 2% of total energy consumption. And I personally believe that their contribution can be increased and should be increased if we want to deal with climate change. So there are just 2 more slides. How many more minutes do I have? No, I have 5 minutes. I've got a timer here as well. Yeah. Okay, thank you. This leads me to my final 2 slides, okay? I'm just gonna be silent. I'm just gonna bring up some news clips, some English news clips, and I just want you to read the titles, please. These are very recent news clips, very recent, in the last month. So currently, we are facing very high electricity prices in Europe, in much of Western Europe at this moment. And the question is why? In the UK, coal-fired power plants are being brought back. Same in Germany, plants that you thought you would almost never need except there's an emergency, they're bringing them back up. In the US, coal demand for electricity generation is going up. Electricity prices on the open market, wholesale prices, have increased significantly. It may be good to show that. This is historical US market price of electricity from, well, I'm struggling to see the date here, but I think it's like from 2008 to 2020. And it's shot up in the last 2 weeks. Spain, shooting up in the last 2 weeks. And the question is, what is causing this? Again, it depends on who you ask. But I've been seeing news articles that told me that the wind speeds in Europe, especially in Western Europe, are at their lowest for 20 years. So wind turbines are sitting idle, or they're spinning very slowly. They cannot generate electricity. So yes, we want, and so what do you do if your wind can, and Europe has invested significant amounts in wind turbines to generate electricity, especially in this country as well, and Denmark, Sweden, the UK. What do you do if the wind turbines don't blow and you don't have any batteries to store as backup? You bring back coal. You bring back coal, and that is exactly what is going on now. Gas prices are through the roof. If you want gas for electricity generation in Europe, you will have to pay through your nose. We have fertilizer plants in the UK and which other country was it? I think it was Sweden, shutting down because the price of gas, which they use to make fertilizers, is just too costly. This is all temporary. It's not going to last forever. Don't be scared. It's all temporary. It might last a few months and it will be over. But energy prices are going through the roof in Western Europe right now, which is very, very scary because the wind is not blowing. Wind turbines can't work. We need to bring back hydrocarbons to power. Just something to think about. I'm not going to give a view on this. Just think about it. And my last slide. I know people here are going to talk about the energy transition, so I'm not qualified to say this. But one thing I truly believe in is that we are so used to centralized systems where we need to have a big wind farm, or we need to have a big solar farm, or a big gas-fired power system, or a big coal-fired power system. I think the future could actually be more of a decentralized system. And by decentralization, I mean, why aren't we generating electricity with solar on our roofs everywhere in the world, or everywhere in the part of the world that can afford it? Why are we not doing that? I think this is something we really need to do. Electricity can be generated anywhere the sun shines or anywhere the wind blows. We can have more innovative ways of doing it and find a way of linking these systems together through a very intelligent, smart energy system. I think the technology to do that exists. It really exists. I think it exists. The question is, do we have the political will? The governments have the political will to do that, because you will actually be stepping on the turf of incumbents, of established players, and established players don't like decentralization. I use 2 things to articulate decentralization here: power and money. And I think both systems will be decentralized eventually, which I think will benefit society as a whole. We're used to a world where everything has to be controlled. My time's almost up. Can I get one more minute?
You can do one, then let's keep.
Okay, one, okay. We live in a world where, just 1 minute, everything has been centralized. We need to think more in terms of decentralization because it is going to happen, whether it's in energy or whether it's in finance. And finance, I use the US dollar, which is a very centralized world's reserve currency. And I use a cryptocurrency here, which we see a bunch of young people creating a parallel financial system outside the established system and starting to challenge it. And I think the same thing can happen in energy. And if we want to accelerate the uptake of clean energy, we need to allow also for decentralization. Get ideas from small companies, small startups, let governments fund them, and not only look up to the established players. I work for an established company, a great established company. I can tell you decision-making can be very slow. Great company, but decision-making can be very slow. You need more nimble, small, fast companies, maybe like the one you work in. And they are the ones who will make a difference. I will end here. Thank you very much. I am 41 seconds above my time. Thank you.